It all started with a simple summer upgrade. I installed a small pool in my backyard. Nothing fancy, just something to cool off in during the insane heat waves. My kids loved it, my neighbors didn't mind, and everything was going great. Until I got a letter from the HOA. Apparently, my pool violated aesthetic guidelines, and I was slapped with a fine. At first, I thought it was some mistake, but nope, they were serious. And not just that, they started sending more letters, threatening additional penalties if I didn't remove the pool immediately. The kicker? A few blocks over, I noticed a board member had an even bigger setup in their yard. No fines, no warnings, just smiles and splashing. That's when I realized this wasn't about the rules. This was personal. That's when something inside me flipped. I wasn't just going to pay the fine and take down my pool. No, I was done, being pushed around by power-hungry HOA members who seemed to enjoy making life miserable for everyone else. So I did some digging, and guess what? The community pool, the one they constantly brag about in their newsletters and host summer parties at, it was built on a parcel of land not actually owned by the HOA. It was owned by a private party, and that party was looking to sell. You can probably guess where this is going. I made an offer they couldn't refuse, and just like that, the tables turned. Now imagine the look on their faces when the same people who fined me for my pool found out they no longer had access to the one they loved most. But that was just the beginning. Because what happened next? That really changed everything and made them regret ever messing with me in the first place. A few days after the land purchase went through, I kept it quiet. I didn't want to tip anyone off too soon. I wanted to watch things unfold naturally, especially with the HOA board, who still had no clue that their precious community pool now sat on private property. My property. Meanwhile, the letters kept coming. More fines. More threats. One even said they were considering legal action if I didn't remove the pool within 10 days. They were relentless, and honestly, it was getting laughable at this point. Now, here's where it gets interesting. I started digging deeper into how the HOA actually operates. Turns out, the board president, let's call her Diane, has a long history of bullying residents over the smallest things. Paint colors, flour, beds, even kids' sidewalk chalk. She treated the HOA like her personal kingdom. But when I pulled up the land records and realized they never actually finalized the paperwork for that community pool area, I couldn't believe the oversight. It was technically just a leased lot that the original developer forgot to transfer over. And now, years later, nobody questioned it. Until I did. Word started spreading that something was off. A couple of board members started acting strange. One even showed up at the pool late at night, walking around with a flashlight, looking over fences, like he was checking for something. At that point, I knew they suspected something had changed. But they didn't know what yet. I could feel the tension growing, and I wasn't sure how long I could keep it under wraps. But then, just as I was planning how to break the news, a surprise HOA meeting was called. No explanation, no agenda, just an urgent community matter. That's when I knew they were on to me, but they still didn't know the full truth. Not yet. The urgent HOA meeting was held in the clubhouse, and the mood was tense from the moment I walked in. Diane sat at the front with her usual fake smile, but she wasn't fooling anyone. You could tell something was bothering her. Her hands kept fidgeting with her clipboard, and she barely looked up when people came in. I took a seat near the back, just to watch it all unfold. The room filled quickly, with residents whispering to each other, clearly confused about what the meeting was even about. Then Diane cleared her throat and launched into a speech about property issues and unauthorized access concerns at the community pool. She didn't mention me by name, but her eyes locked onto mine when she said, "We believe someone may be interfering with HOA property rights." It took everything in me not to grin. They were scrambling, and they still didn't know who had pulled the rug out from under them. Meanwhile, a new subplot started brewing. One of the younger board members, Greg, had been quiet during most of the meeting, but I'd noticed he'd stopped by my house earlier that week pretending to be on a jog. He slowed down near my fence, took a look at my pool, and walked off, without saying a word. Now, at the meeting, he suddenly spoke up, questioning whether the HOA had actually updated land ownership documents over the years. Diane brushed it off, but it was clear there was division starting to grow within the board. Back in the neighborhood, whispers had started. A few folks I barely spoke to were suddenly stopping by during their evening walks, asking me vague questions about the pool rules and what I thought of the HOA lately. It was clear word was leaking, but not the whole truth. Not yet. I still had one card left to play, and the timing had to be perfect. Because once I revealed everything, there'd be no going back. The tension after that meeting didn't just fade, it grew. Over the next week, things in the neighborhood started to shift. Suddenly, I noticed more HOA board members driving past my house slower than usual. One even parked across the street for a good 15 minutes pretending to be on a phone call, but it was obvious he was watching. At the same time, Diane began pushing out new HOA bulletins filled with vague warnings about violations of trust and pending investigations. She didn't name names, but it was clear the messages were aimed at me. Then came the real twist. One morning, a notice showed up on my front door, certified, official-looking, with a bold HOA seal on the top. It claimed I had trespassed on common property and demanded I appear before the board for a disciplinary hearing. I couldn't help but laugh. They still had no idea that I legally owned the land they were accusing me of invading. But instead of responding right away, I waited. I wanted to see how far they'd go. Meanwhile, the weather had been warming up fast, and residents were getting antsy. Everyone was asking when the community pool would open. Memorial Day weekend was around the corner, and the HOA usually held a big kickoff event. I knew they'd planned it weeks ago. Flyers had already gone up. But behind the scenes, Diane and her board were scrambling, unsure whether they even had the legal right to host it this year. A few brave neighbors started, questioning things more openly, asking for land records, requesting access to HOA documents. Diane started dodging questions, growing more defensive with each one. And that's when I made my move. I sent an anonymous tip to a few residents, attaching the public land records and highlighting the parcel number. No explanations, just facts. It lit a fuse I knew would explode soon, because the HOA had just days to figure out how to explain something they didn't even know how to control. The morning after I dropped the anonymous tip, the neighborhood group chat exploded. Screenshots of the land records were flying around, and people were tagging HOA board members nonstop, demanding answers. Some neighbors were confused, others furious. And then came the shocker. An older resident named Mr. Alvarez posted a scanned letter from over 10 years ago, showing that the original developer had warned the HOA about needing to finalize the pool lot purchase, but they never followed through. It had been swept under the rug, forgotten, until now. That same afternoon, I got a knock at my door. It wasn't Diane. It was Greg, the younger, more reasonable board member, looking uncomfortable but serious. He said, "We need to talk. Off the record." I let him in, and after a long pause, he admitted something I didn't expect. Apparently, there had been internal warnings about the land issue for years. Some board members wanted to resolve it quietly, but Diane blocked every attempt. She was afraid fixing it would cost too much and make her look incompetent. Then Greg dropped the real bomb. Diane had just filed an emergency motion to suspend my HOA membership and restrict access to community resources for any resident, under investigation. In other words, she was trying to freeze me out, right before Memorial Day weekend. But here's where it really got wild. Greg had seen a draft of a letter Diane planned to send to all residents, blaming me for the pool closure, saying I was trespassing and interfering with HOA operations. She was planning to paint me as a threat to the community. Suddenly, it wasn't just about a pool anymore. It was about my reputation, my family's standing in the neighborhood, and a smear campaign that could turn everyone against me. I knew I had to act fast, because if Diane sent that letter, the damage might be done before I even had the chance to set the record straight. The next morning, before Diane could get ahead of the truth, I printed out everything: copies of the land deed, the developer's original letter, and screenshots from the neighborhood group chat showing residents already piecing things together. Then I sent it all in one big email to the entire HOA mailing list, subject line, "Who really owns the pool?" Within minutes, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Some people were shocked, others furious, mostly at Diane. I just sat back and watched the truth finally take hold. That afternoon, a group of residents marched down to the HOA office, demanding an emergency vote to remove Diane as board president. Greg, to his credit, stood by their side. Diane tried to fight it, but with the documents now public and neighbors turning on her, she had no ground to stand on. She resigned on the spot, blaming miscommunication and administrative errors. But no one bought it. The board voted to cancel the smear letter immediately, and I was cleared of all false accusations. But just when it seemed everything had settled, the twist came. A quiet, elderly neighbor who'd lived here long before most of us, Mrs. Jensen, reached out. She said the land I'd bought wasn't just where the pool sat. It extended beyond that, including the small greenbelt area the HOA used for their monthly meetings and summer BBQs. That land had never been transferred either. Somehow in my purchase, I'd acquired both plots, and no one noticed. So now, with the HOA scrambling to rewrite their policies and neighbors suddenly being very friendly, I stood there holding the rights to every bit of common space they once used against me. I wasn't petty, but I wasn't going to let them forget it either. Let's just say the next HOA meeting was held in a very different location, and the sign at the pool gate now reads, "Private property, access by permission only." After the dust settled, life in the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. Well, a new kind of normal. With Diane gone and the HOA under new leadership, things got a lot quieter. The new board, led by Greg, took a more balanced and respectful approach. They started actually listening to residents, reviewing outdated policies, and, most importantly, learning from the mess they'd just come out of. As for the community pool, I decided not to be spiteful. I reopened it to everyone under a simple agreement. Respect my property, and everyone's welcome. No more fines, no more drama. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact started waving again. Some even apologized for believing the rumors Diane had spread. Mrs. Jensen invited me over for coffee and thanked me for protecting the area's real history. It felt good to know I hadn't just won a battle. I'd helped reset the balance in a place where power had been misused for too long. The pool that started it all? It's still there, and every weekend, my kids and their friends laugh and splash around like nothing ever happened. That's how it should have always been. I didn't go into this wanting a fight, but sometimes standing up for what's right means being willing to challenge people who think they can't be challenged. So, if you ever find yourself dealing with a nightmare HOA or someone trying to push you around with rules that only seem to apply to you, do your homework. Look deeper. You might be surprised at what you uncover. And who knows, you might end up owning the land under their feet. Literally. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy stories where the underdog flips the script. See you in the next one.